the saga with the Premier League, Saudi Arabia, Newcastle voting for against the loans of players from associated teams. This has been a bit messy. It's been a little bit complicated. I know you've done your best to break it down for us, mate. And I think it's quite interesting, actually, looking at the breakdown and especially how we voted, given our circumstances as well.
Yeah, so this yesterday was a really, I don't know if it kind of got lost in the mire and everything like that. It was a very busy day yesterday, but there was a lot of kind of contention around it. So yesterday, there was a vote in London at the Churchill Hotel in Portman Square. All of the Premier League clubs had execs in attendance, and the clubs were set to vote on the decision to implement a ban on loan moves and loan moves only. I feel like this has kind of been glossed over in points, but it was only for loan moves for players in the top flight between affiliated clubs just in the January transfer window. So whilst the outcome means that in theory, someone like Ruben Neves, which was, I think, what kind of caused this, because there were links that Ruben Neves could be loaned from Al Hilal in Saudi Arabia to Newcastle, because of the connections between the owners, they can get that through pretty easily. And so this temporary measure was going to be put in place, or was up to be put in place, to protect the integrity of the Premier League and provide the necessary time for the league to find a long-term, more permanent solution. And so, as is with this kind of regulation, a 2/3 majority, so 14 clubs, was needed for the regulation to be put in place. And there were only 13 clubs that voted to implement the ban. And it's interesting that, according to Martin Ziegler of The Times, the 7 clubs that rejected the ban were, unsurprisingly, Newcastle, Sheffield United, and whilst you might be kind of raising your eyebrows at that one, it's important to know that Sheffield United are also owned by the Saudi state. Sheffield United, Manchester City, Everton, Chelsea, Wolves, and Forest. And so it doesn't look like Villa were in the list, which means we seem to be one of the clubs, according to reports, that didn't vote for the ban. And it's interesting because we own a decent network of clubs. You know, we've got Vittoria Guimaraes, none of the stature that you really believe that we could loan anybody in that would have a massive impact on the club in January. You know, we haven't got a club that kind of matches Villa necessarily in stature on the global stage. But we've looked to seemingly block this ban. It hasn't gone through, meaning that clubs are still free to do this. You may think that it kind of stops there, but there are clubs. It's also important to know that, like, the owner of Crystal Palace also owns Lyon. So in theory, Crystal Palace are definitely a club that can look to exploit that, because you imagine they could definitely loan someone in from struggling Lyon that would help their season. So there are other clubs with multi-club ownership models in place that have voted against this ban. But nevertheless, we're one club short, and we're going to be going into January with this kind of big dichotomy. And it's a bit of a messy situation. I think it really puts forward the need for an independent regulator in these situations, why we're allowing clubs, particularly those clubs who it is in their best interests to block this kind of legislation going through, to vote on this and have such a deciding say, is kind of beyond me. I think that's a definite faux pas on behalf of the league. But they do have a chance to rectify this. I don't think it is all doom and gloom. It was only for loan moves anyway. There's nothing to stop Newcastle signing Cristiano Ronaldo, Karim Benzema, Ruben Neves, whoever they want to sign from the Saudi Pro League. And there is, it seems, more long-term legislation coming. So let's see what happens after January. But yes, it's interesting to learn of Villa's position in that voting, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, it's complicated, and this is just the start of everything, isn't it? That's the thing, you know. It starts with the loans, then it will move on to the permanents, and then they'll be looking into transfer fees as well. Because if Cristiano Ronaldo joins Newcastle for £10 million, there'll be people saying, "Well, that's below market value. That's shady."
Well, it's important to note you had St. Maximin do it, so that this has kind of already begun, isn't it? Because St. Maximin went to Al Ali, I believe, and so it's not a sort of path that's started to be trodden, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. It's murky, but it needs to be sorted, and I'm sure it will eventually.